Anyway, it's all right.
Speaking of vices, I'm just going to have a sip of tea here now before we start.
Go on there, yeah. You can drink the tea throughout, you know.
Oh, and I will. But I just needed to ready myself.
Oh, okay.
Welcome to Have a Word with Yourself.
That's not even the name.
Have a word with yourself.
It's just a word with.
Oh. Well, welcome to the podcast where I don't know the name of it. A word with yourself.
There you are. You got it in two.
I should have a word with myself.
Just go have a word with yourself there, will you? Cop on. Coming live with new microphone. So the sound is going to be like music to your ears.
Don't oversell it.
It's going to be so smooth. Still my annoying nasally voice coming through loud and clear.
Little by little, we're getting a little bit better at talking to each other.
It's only taken, 6 years? No, more than that. 7 years. Jesus.
It's a long time.
It is. But to be fair, we've only been doing this like 8 months or something.
Yeah.
Not even.
Not even. Yeah, a lot less.
No.
Yeah, Neil showed me a picture today of us from 9 years ago, and we look like babies.
Oh my God. It's mad.
Look like babies. Yeah, I was like, oh my God. Yeah.
Like, oh God, I don't think I look any different. But then you look back and you're like,
but then
oh
you look
my
back.
God. Yeah.
I'm okay with it.
Yeah, it's grand. It's fine. I'm okay with it. Kind of.
She says with that tone of voice.
Yeah, I'm okay.
I love it. I love getting old. It's great.
I know, honestly, yeah, it is. It is nice to be more comfortable in yourself, I guess.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Less caring of what people think is a gift.
It's a gift.
No, that is a gift.
Anyway.
So today we are still going to continue to talk about some fallacies and biases. We don't know how many will go into this podcast because we have a few more to get to, and we're probably just going to record them all over a couple of sessions. So we don't know how many is going to go into this one, but we'll start, and you stop listening whenever you're bored.
Which will be never. Ever. I'm listening to a book right now, actually, because I have lots of time to kill on the train, and I downloaded it years ago, but I just don't want to buy any more audiobooks. They're really expensive. They're like the same price as like a hardback.
Yes, if not more.
Yeah. So I have a couple of books that I downloaded like over the years and haven't finished them, so I'm restarting them because I forgot what they said. But this one is called Never Split the Difference, and it's this FBI hostage negotiator who like just talks about his time like negotiating with kidnappers, and what are those people called that have hostages?
Kidnappers?
I don't know. Like if they're in a bank or whatever and they have hostages, I don't know what you would call them. But that
situation, bank robbers with hostages.
Yeah, there's no particular name for them. Watch now, there probably is. But anyway, yeah. So he just talks about like all the ways like you can negotiate with bank robbers with hostages, and he does talk a lot about like the anchoring bias and things like that, because like they'll put out a number like I want 5 million, and then it's like based around that number, and they're like, you have to say, well, how am I meant to come up with $5 million? I'm gonna have to like, get someone to approve it, blah blah blah. It's gonna take ages, and just trying to like freak them out and get them to come down and down and down. Anyway, I just thought it was funny that we've been talking about it, and then the FBI are using similar techniques.
Yeah, well, it's because human beings are sometimes I was going to say dumb, but I feel bad about that. I don't think that's true. I think we are just, kind of tied and locked into some of our natural kind of behaviors and tendencies. And sometimes that works really well for us, and other times that works against us.
Yep. Depending on which situation we're in.
Yeah,
exactly. So thought that was interesting. So anyway, I think we've like 4 left or whatever, but we'll see how we get on. And then
did you feel really smug listening to it though? Did you, when you were like, oh, I know what he's talking about now?
I did, yeah. I had a big smug head on me on the train. I was like, yep, I know all about that. And so thought it was very interesting. They talked about another one called, one of the ones we're not going to talk about yet anyway, the framing, not framing bias, but like how you frame things, and they're like, well, we'll give you 90% of what you asked for, or we'll give you 10% less than what you asked for. Like you're going to think that, which one sounds, even though they're like the same thing. Yeah. It's just framing things. And so it's very interesting. But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
So the first one we're going to talk about today is the halo effect. The halo effect is where your perception of someone, your opinion of someone is based on a singular kind of feature of that person rather than kind of the whole picture. And so the reason it's called a halo effect is kind of like if someone was really good at one particular thing, it gives them a halo effect, like they're like a perfect angel, right? And so that can be like really detrimental to, well, you can imagine lots of reasons, but in the workplace specifically, it can be a real downfall when you have very charismatic people working in your company, especially if they're leaders. Because that's not to say that all charismatic people are necessarily bad at their job. Of course, they're not. It's the same mix as everybody else. But people have a tendency to not notice or underplay the downsides or something that a very charismatic person is not very good at because they're so charismatic, right? So
yeah,
that's a tricky thing.
Yeah, it goes against like your natural instincts to, if someone's really good at something, you all just automatically assume that's a positive thing. So they're probably good at something else, or they're probably good at that too, just because it's a really positive thing. But like they're just as likely to be bad at their jobs or anything, just as anybody else is.
And it's kind of even then worse then because if you don't know, so for example, say this actually happens a lot in tech companies, and this is where there needs to be like better systems to deal with it and to give people different avenues. But you have some people who are very good as individual contributors, as ICs. This happens a lot for like developers and technical people, and they'll be like the best like developer that you've ever seen. They're so good at that, and then people are like, this is great, let's make them a manager.
Yeah,
we'll promote them. The only promotion path is a manager, so we'll make them a manager, and then they suddenly stall in their career. Nobody can really figure it out because they were such a rising star and yada yada yada. And like the answer can be partly attributed to the halo effect, because this thing of just because they're extraordinarily good at one thing, they'll be good at everything else. And that's not necessarily true. You see it a lot, specifically when you're turning technical people or very kind of specialized ICs and trying to make them managers of teams. It's not necessarily an automatic path that should be pursued. People need to be assessed separately on their ability to manage, which is differently. And then because people assume they're good, they can go for a very long time not doing a great job because your perception of them is already that they're excellent.
Yeah.
And so, you're not really then noticing as easily where they're not doing well or they might be struggling.
Yeah.
Or if they're doing something different or they're giving opinions about something different, you assume that that's great. Or that's,
it must be
wow,
something...
that's so different. It's something new and genius that I haven't heard of. In reality, it's like, no, it's just not their area of expertise and they're actually really bad at that thing. Right? Now, that's not, of course, it's not everybody. It's
of course.
It does happen a lot. It does happen a lot. And it's something that really needs to be watched out for. Again, coming back to like so many of these things, it's like you need to take ideas and data based on a meritocracy, not on the person that it comes from, because that also the halo effect really ties in with the ad hominem kind of fallacy as well, and it kind of all mixes together into its own thing.
Yeah, they're all kind of linked. You see like very charismatic CEOs that are in place for years, but then it turns out like they've run the company into the ground, but because they've got this halo effect and people are blinded by how charismatic they are and they're able to motivate people, but their ideas are not actually that great. So sorry, there's a kid screaming outside my door. I'm not sure if you just heard that.
Can't hear it.
Really loud. It's anyway. But yeah, you see that a lot with like CEOs that like people are really that are really famous, that you would hear. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but I will think of some. But yeah, it usually takes a couple of years before they realize, oh God, wow, like this isn't actually working. Like they're good as a charismatic speaker or whatever, or like the other way around, they're a really good technical person, but they don't know how to motivate people or lead. As you said, they might not have those skills. So it is difficult to find people with soft skills and hard skills that are able to do it all. And we've talked about that many times.
And I tell you one place that it's actually really hard to deal with, at least that I found myself, is kind of in the reverse. It's when you have somebody who works for you, I guess, or with you, but in my experience, it was for me. And they're so nice. They are always on time. They show up to everything. They're always very presentable. They're very nice, polite, super professional, yada yada yada. But they're just not that good at their job.
Mhm.
And it's so
Yeah. It's
tricky.
hard. Yeah.
And if you're not conscious of that bias, or you don't have the systems and structures in place to do like performance reviews objectively, that's where those things can get really lost. Because you can be like, oh, I love Leslie. Like, she's always here. She's always super nice. She's super professional.
She just sucks at her
Customers,
job.
everybody really loves her. Customers really like her. Blah 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 blah. But her quality work's just actually like the lowest. It's tricky because there's
Not a true
those things
story, by
are
the way. Not a true
not
story.
a true. No, first of all, Leslie never worked for me, so any of my stories about work for me are not about Leslie.
Lies. Anyway.
But it's yeah, it's kind of it's very hard, because the other thing is that those things are valuable in and of themselves. It's not that those things aren't valuable. And to be clear, someone who's very charismatic, charisma is an incredibly valuable skill to have as well. And they're very useful in certain situations. So it's not about like devaluing the thing that gives them the halo effect. It's about trying to make sure that you don't let that halo effect occur into other things that they haven't already proven to excel at or be very good at, right? Because there's like, if you look at the flip side of a halo effect, well, I guess halo effect another way, like there's a great stereotype of a lot of tech bros or even like sales tech bros, you see it a lot, where there's this notion of someone who is brings in great sales, right? But is an asshole, right? And everybody hates them, they're mean to everybody, they're always like undercutting people, backstabbing people, yada yada yada. And it creates a really, as we know, we talked about this before, the knock-on effect in like a toxic kind of work culture, all of that. And so there's the advice there is largely that you can't take their performance by itself in isolation, that you have to consider the effect it has like on the team. And that's true. And what's also true is that you might have someone who is super nice, professional, helpful, everybody likes them, great for kind of morale and like teamwork generally, maybe not actually the best at their job, but that might they might be kind of values and skills that you actually want to keep for the merit like of them themselves, and that you can kind of carry that workload or lack of workload because of the benefit they give you in like a different area. So like it's the halo effect isn't necessarily something that, I mean, the halo effect itself, yes, can be harmful, but you shouldn't let the hate, just because someone has one or two things that it isn't good, it doesn't devalue the stuff they are good at. You just have to assess correctly what's actually valuable to your company and your situation at that time, and be conscious of the halo effect so that you can assess correctly, what kind of skills and stuff where people are strong and where people are weak.
Yeah. And so you can set them up for success as well, right? Because it's not their fault, that they're really strong in one area and they've been put in another position because someone else assumes they're going to be good at it. They're probably not going to say, oh, by the way, like, I'm a terrible people manager, I'm not going to take the job. Or maybe they will, maybe they have that self-awareness. But, if somebody offers you a promotion, more money, all this stuff, it's hard to turn down before you get into it and realize what you really have to do. So, you're not really setting people up for success if you're only focused really on their main attribute. So,
and also defining that success, because I think success is defined in a lot of companies as the CEO, right? And the route to being like the biggest boss you can be. And that doesn't have to be true, right?
For everybody,
a lot of people's definition of success is getting into a job that pays them so that they're comfortable in life and can afford the things that they need. And that doesn't interfere with their personal life, or at least minimally interferes with their personal life if they're, in a profession that's on call or shifts or whatever. And that's it, and so I think it's also like being able to redefine different types of successes within a company, so that the halo effect, you're reducing the risk for the halo effect to occur, specifically as it relates to, putting people into management that shouldn't be there and don't want to be there. But it's their only way, it's their only route for promotion, it's their only route to make more money, and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah. We've talked about that before, like the individual contributor versus like a manager of people. Every company I've worked in, I've hardly ever seen, I don't even recall a time when I've seen an individual contributor. It's always been, you get promoted, you get more people to manage, and you're doing less of your actual job, then you're just more managing people to do the job that helps you or whatever. So it just doesn't suit some people at all.
No. And it's hard to do, right? To be clear, it's one of the reasons it's not common is because it's not instinctive within a company structure, and so it is something that requires more work and is subjective to the company that you're in. Because you might be in a company where success really only does look like management, and as long as you're clear and transparent about that. but if you can make other routes happen for people. And we're a little bit off topic with that. Maybe that's a whole other video of like how to structure for different types of success within a company.
Yeah. You also see the halo effect not in work, just like with extremely good looking people. People are like, oh my God, they must be so smart, or just they must be so funny. I'm like, I'm victim to it as well.
That is a good point. Yeah. Well, we all are, because we are biologically predisposed to favor attractiveness, and more specifically, because attractiveness is subjective, what as human beings we have decided is attractive, because those traits tend to align biologically with the increased chance of reproduction and furthering the species. Like it's very
we can't control it. Like
it's just biological.
How hard we try.
And there's obviously a nurture aspect and a society aspect to it as well, right? But it's true though, like we are hardwired for that, and so it's very hard to try and undo that. But we assume if someone seems to be competent, if you had two people with the same level of competency and one of them was like incredibly attractive in your eyes, you will naturally think that person who's incredibly attractive is better at their job than the other person, and that is something to like fight against. That's why you need to have objective ways of measuring performance and outcomes and KPIs and all those kind of things.
And sure, look.
But then also know how to take advantage of that. If you're in a very sales focused organization, right, you do want the charismatic, potentially like people who are going to appeal to your target audience as much as possible.
You're marketing yourself, so you're putting like the best foot forward, especially in the sales.
That our first impressions one as well, of course, is there. That anchoring bias comes into play. Like, so it's all it's all of them together. It is absolutely a whole like multi-system of stuff. We've just decided to human beings, when I say we, not me and Leslie, myself and Leslie obviously are only parroting stuff that other people have researched and discovered, but
original ideas.
We as humans have decided to analyze this ad nauseum, as we are also want to do.
Okay, well, that's good. I like that one too. I like them all.
The
next one was interesting as well. Groupthink.
Because this is like, so we talked about the bandwagon effect. There's not, you're really splitting hairs when you're kind of defining the bandwagon effect versus groupthink. The way I kind of see it, people correct me if I'm wrong here, is like the bandwagon effect to me is about when you're seeing everybody doing it, you're worried about that you are missing something, right? So you do it because you think they must know something I don't know. So it's more like of a FOMO thing, right, than anything else. Whereas groupthink to me is more about peer pressure or people pleasing. So like groupthink is very much where you're trying to prioritize, like group harmony, right? For want of a better word. But, you're prioritizing everybody getting along and everybody agreeing, and that kind of like feeling, and at the expense of critical thinking. So it's like conflict avoidance fundamentally, but like it can really happen in a group when everybody just wants to get along, or that if on previous occasions you've seen disagreements become very disharmonious or unharmonious, you're trying to avoid that. So and again, that's kind of natural, right? Like, again, for people to try and avoid, conflict, avoid harm. So I mean, like, I've seen this, like I've sat in conference rooms and senior leadership meetings that have devolved to people yelling at each other, and you do naturally just try to figure out how that happened and try to avoid that in the future. And what really came out of that was a situation where you didn't really feel like you could just outright give your kind of unvarnished opinion. You had to really kind of dress up a lot of the stuff you were saying and
dance around things,
dance around stuff and say, I just thought of this thing, like maybe it's a stupid idea.
Position it in a way that's not so critical or
and honestly that wastes time, and so like I have no time for that anymore. It absolutely wastes time. And then it also enables bad behavior, right, as well, if it is bad behavior that you're avoiding. But it's basically, it can lead to poor decision making. If everybody's just trying to agree with everybody else because they just want to get along, then you're not thinking critical about things, you're not examining ideas and strategies as well as you should, and you kind of just start following along, and that can... I mean, the way sometimes when we've talked about, real company examples of something they've done, and we're like, we seriously question the judgment of that. Like, there's no way that company can be that stupid. Case in point, Amazon's RTO, right? then, sometimes this can be how it happens, is because there's
people are
just this
afraid to stand
pressure
up
to
to
like,
it.
we have this strategy, isn't it great? And everybody's like, yeah, it's great. And because they don't feel like they can dissent or question it for whatever reason, because they're trying to keep the peace. And then eventually it becomes a thing and everybody's like, were you high? Like, what possessed you to do this? Did nobody tell you? Surely somebody said that this is a terrible idea or question it? And the answer is like, maybe they didn't, because of groupthink.
Yeah. It has to be. It nearly has to be, the reason for things like Amazon's RTO, which did not go to plan, by the way, because they didn't have enough seats, didn't have enough parking. Like, nonsense. We could have told you this.
Apparently they're also surprised that so many people are looking for other jobs. And there was a mass kind of, a lot of people pulled where they had applied for jobs, like pulled their applications from jobs, like. And they've really doubled down in it. Like, I literally read an article yesterday that I meant to send to you that was Jassy like doubling down on how good this was. Definitely.
Oh my God, he has to, doesn't he? Like, he's never going to say, "Oh, well, we made a mistake." No. But we could have told you that,
and we did.
Yeah,
it's just
in our very first recording. And he doesn't care what we think. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, the other way it kind of can get where it can come up is in hiring. So the problem is it's groupthink basically enables and then creates like homogeny and hegemony, and so it then you have people hiring themselves fundamentally, right? And or because you get so many people that have to agree on a hire, you never find that hire because sometimes there's too many cooks in the kitchen, right? And it kind of, by the time you agree on a set of whatever candidate criteria, requirements, that set of requirements is so small because so many people have had to agree on it. There's only very few things they'll agree on. It tends to be like a really narrow definition of a candidate, and then it discourages potentially more diverse candidates, right? And people have a tendency to hire people like themselves, and anyway, there's the whole thing. So it's groupthink is definitely a tricky one as well. And if anybody hears about it the first time, they're like, oh yeah, I've seen that like a million times. Yeah.
When you actually think back, you're like, oh yeah, I have seen that.
You've been, how many meetings have you been in where someone just kind of talks about a new strategy and then everybody just stays silent or says yes, like that there's something going on there, people are not engaging and stuff. Like it's not great. Now the ways to kind of like counter it, which actually we didn't really talk about in the Halo. Well, we did talk about the Halo effect data. This one's like kind of different. And honestly, I think the way to counter this can be really dicey, because the way to counter it is to create space or actively assign someone to be like devil's advocate. And everybody hates a devil's advocate. Or you're encouraging constructive criticism, which is a good thing, but again, it makes people very uncomfortable. So like the way to deal with it is not necessarily as easy of like, look, just make sure you're looking at the data and being objective, which is a very neutral stance on things. For this one, it's more like, well, in every meeting, assign a devil's advocate to pull apart what's being talked about, or create a time within that meeting specifically that says, okay, tell me all the ways that this is a bad idea, which I like that one personally. I think it's great. You kind of make a game out of it. So you can you really have to think
be open to that.
And that's tricky because especially if you have new people or the power dynamics off, people can feel singled out, they can feel torn down, and you have to manage that very closely to make sure that doesn't happen. And also, to be clear, that's solutions for when you're in an organization that is well run and is trying to be good and have good intentions, and in the ones that aren't so well run and groupthink is happening because there's like a really volatile boss situation, because it happens there a lot, then you don't really have the space to do this kind of stuff. So there is a solution. The problem is you have to manage it closely. And in a lot of environments where groupthink has happened for toxic reasons, you don't have the space to put those, kind of solutions in place, or those like counter activities in place. So
that's true. A lot of times when you're in those meetings, just nobody's thinking about that type of thing, right? Everyone's just like, let's get the decision made, like let's go, like they just, it's just like your average meeting, blah blah blah. Nobody's actually thinking of how these things are affecting it, and somebody has to be the one to call it out, and it needs to be like a senior person as well who kind of points it out too, so they can actually make progress on it. So it's it's very difficult. People are just preoccupied with what they're doing, their tasks, blah blah blah. So nobody's really Not that I've seen anyway. But yeah, a lot of times people are just like, let's just get this done and get the meeting over with.
That's a good point, because sometimes that can come from like groupthink can come from a place of like low morale and low engagement as well. Like, so not necessarily like groupthink can come, as we, potentially from a toxic place, but it can also come from like low morale where people just don't care.
Yeah, they're just like,
so
whatever.
They're not.
Like,
it's not that they're afraid to disagree. It's not that they're avoiding conflict. It's that they don't care enough to give their opinion anymore, and they're not engaged and they're not dialed into what's happening. And that's a very different problem. It's still groupthink, to be clear. But it's a very different problem, because if you already have that noticeably in your company, understand that you are already in big trouble from a company morale that requires big moves to overcome. If like, you can even overcome it. Groupthink isn't your problem. Right, it's your symptom. And actually, that's a good point. Actually, maybe groupthink could be, categorized in a way that it's not necessarily the cause of some things. Groupthink ends up being a symptom of other things.
Yeah, of like a toxic culture or something like that. Yeah.
Whereas a lot of the other ones we've talked about are like the root cause of something. Groupthink actually really feels like it's a symptom of another issue, whatever that other issue is.
Exactly. Yeah, that would have to be addressed first.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah, write that down now. We discovered a new area of psychology.
To be clear, in case people don't understand the dry humor, we know we didn't discover this.
Speak for yourself. Anyway. I would hope.
Oh my God, yeah.
That the amount of times I say things that people don't understand in Canada, and just like, no, I'm joking.
It's funny because it's so ridiculous.
Yeah,
I need you to understand that.
Ludicrous.
Yeah.
But everyone takes things so literally here that it's yeah. Anyway, it's tough. It's tough. Very tough for us here.
I'm definitely funnier in my own country, that's for sure.
Yeah. So we think.
Yeah.
Oh God. Well, do you want to do another one?
Yeah, sure.
Sure,
why not? Should we keep going?
We've lied through the last two.
Yeah. Recency bias. We mentioned this because
I get confused.
Yeah. No, but we have mentioned it. The reason we mentioned it is because it is so close to some other stuff.
Yeah.
Like,
I am getting confused between a few of them because they all are so similar.
And actually, I wonder if we fly through these two and then maybe the next recording is actually categorizing them into a lot of the ones that are very much the same or have the same solution. So like a two birds, one stone. If you do this stuff, you can tackle like these three, kind of fallacies and biases, which potentially, you could. So recency bias is basically where you give more weight to recent events than to earlier, more comprehensive data, right? And it's very similar to the other ones. So like we kind of talk about confirmation bias, which is just giving more weight to stuff that you want to, right? We talk about anchoring bias, which is giving more weight to the thing you see first. And we talked also then about availability heuristic, which is about giving weight to the information that's more readily available in your head. So the stuff you remember more easily. So recency bias is like the same flavor of a one. It's just where you give weight to stuff that's most recent, that's just happened. And so a great example of this is that I was speaking to someone recently and they were telling me about a new CRM that they were using, which is called Attio, ATTIO. And I'd never heard of it before. It's like, wow, I'd never heard of that before. And I swear to God, I've seen it everywhere. That's kind of confirmation bias as well. But it's because it was just so recent. It came up in my head and now I'm seeing it everywhere. And I'm like, oh, maybe it is really good. It must be really good because I just heard about this and now I'm seeing it everywhere. So it must be good. And then I had to stop myself and be like, or maybe they're just on a big marketing campaign.
Yeah, and I'm aware of them now. So
I'm aware of them now.
Yeah,
like whereas I wouldn't have noticed their ads before if someone hadn't just told me about them.
Yeah.
So that's like a very minor way that's like very inoffensive of doing it. Some of the ways that, again, it kind of comes down to evaluating the performance of people is, if someone does something really well just recently, but you're doing an annual review, and you weight that heavily because it was more recent rather than looking at their whole year as a whole. That's a way it can kind of like, come up.
And if they did something bad recently, even though the rest of their performance was fantastic, but that one thing that happened a week beforehand is going to stick out more prominently.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it works both ways. So, it's kind of like, say you had a customer for 5 years and they've always been really positive, and then they just put in one complaint and now you're like, wow, this customer is so unhappy with us. And it's like, well, No,
Yeah.
they just recently put in a complaint that, of course, we will deal with, and we hope that it gets resolved, and then they'll go back to being a happy, satisfied customer that they have been for 5 years, right?
Mhm.
So it's, a recency bias can
Yeah.
kind of basically, it really just skews where you're likely to put your resources and your attention
Yeah.
and how you make decisions, right? And so again, if anybody's listening to the other ones, that we won't belabor that point too much because we've talked about all the ways that can affect you, but that's a big one. Another way where it can work either against or for you, depending where you are, again, in hiring. So if you're the first candidate in a hiring process to be interviewed, you might either benefit from the anchoring bias, right? Because you're first in and you're the bar that people have set, or you get screwed by recency bias because they'll remember the most recent candidate they interviewed and be like, wow, this person was great, and they've forgotten about you. So it's really like,
just depends.
Yeah.
How good you are. If
Right.
you're the top
A little bit. Yeah.
point.
And so, kind of luck of the draw on that one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. God.
Yeah.
I mean, we just tend to forget things after a while. Like when you do something, if you do something like you're really embarrassed about, like over time, you kind of forget about it. But at the time, it's so recent that you're just so, panicked or worried about it. So yeah, it's just like, again, human nature to over time kind of, forget about something or think about it less.
Yeah. Yeah. We would like to tell this is don't trust your memory. Don't trust your ability as a human being to evaluate stuff based on your memory alone, because your memory will trick you. And
except if you're doing something like driving or something like
that.
Yeah. Just trust your brain there.
Yeah, muscle memory. Maybe that's the only one we should remember.
Yeah.
That's the only one we should give good weight to. So yeah, again, like the solution to this is the same as the other ones, which is, track the data, measure the data, make sure you've got like structures where you can objectively assess either people, decisions, strategies, whatever it is that you're assessing. Make sure you get a good kind of, depending on obviously the size of the decision, whatever you're doing, like get outside opinions, write on things if it's big decisions, or if it's small ones, just, do your best and be aware of it. And that's kind of really all you can do. Step. Yeah. So that's recency bias.
That one. Yeah, very similar to a few of them. Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
The last one is something I do not suffer from at all.
Yeah. So the last one is overconfidence bias. And overconfidence bias is exactly what it sounds like. It's when you overestimate yourself. You overestimate yourself or your ability to be able to like predict outcomes, right? And obviously it can lead to making poor decisions. It can lead to taking unnecessary risks, ignoring advice for people. When I said that, in your head, did you think, don't make unnecessary journeys? Me too.
What was her name? Teresa?
Yeah.
Don't take risks on treacherous
Every
roads.
time there's a storm.
Every time, don't take risks. Oh God! For anyone who doesn't know, it's an Irish TV reporter. You'll have it's not.
I
even
think it
explainable.
actually went a little global. I think it does pop up now.
Yeah. Teresa Mannion.
Fair play, Teresa. Like. Honestly, a moment you genuinely should be proud of was the best thing
cultural
ever.
Icon.
Absolute icon.
Anyway,
so overconfidence bias. Yeah, it's like it's ego. Fundamentally, it's like when you're just overestimating your abilities, and it can be. Again, this can be hard to overcome. This is one of the ones that really benefits from like self-awareness. Like we talked about the group that really benefit from a little bit of self-awareness in this one, or recognizing that like, nobody's infallible. The more success you have, the more this comes into play. Because there's another one here, and I can't remember, did we talk about it? We don't talk about this in terms of the workplace because it's not necessarily as relevant, but there's another bias called survivor bias. Not really as relevant for the workforce, but it basically means that like because something hasn't happened to you so far, you think it's less likely to happen to you or it will never happen to you. So you're kind of like, for example, say you regularly swam on like a beach that's known for I don't know, freak waves. Yeah. And there's like basically a set probability of if that can affect you or not. But you're like, oh, but I swim there every day. Nothing has ever happened. And therefore it's fine. It's perfectly safe. And it's like, well, that's just not factually true. That's survivor bias. Right. It's the same thing. This is one thing that like where it's incredibly bad survivor bias is where people who drink and drive. Because they're like, well, I've driven, like I've never crashed and all, and it's like that's not how this works, right? Anyway, so different topic. But so survivor bias kind of with overconfidence bias can come into play because if someone is repeatedly successful at something, they start to think, oh, I must be better than everybody else at this.
It's not just luck or
yeah. Right. It's like, no. I have this outcome has happened repeatedly for me, and therefore I must be better, and this outcome will always happen for me. That's kind of what survivor bias is. So overconfidence bias can play off of that really strongly because you could have someone who's like, well, I have successfully built and sold 2 companies. I'm on my 3rd company. I am now confident that all of my ideas are the right ideas. Yeah. So I know best. I am the smartest person in the room because I've done this before and I've been successful. And so that's, overconfidence bias comes into play there because you're not really looking at the situation at hand. And that just has awful effects across companies, right? And honestly, it's these kind of leaders that end up creating things like groupthink, right? Because they'll like dominate brainstorming sessions, right? Because they're convinced that their idea is the best idea and everybody just needs to realize it and or they need to explain it enough. If people have kind of raised objections or like talked about risks or like given like risk assessments, like they're more likely to dismiss those or to argue against them, right? Because again, you're so sure that you're right and you're so sure that like this has worked for you before, therefore it'll definitely work for you this time, and you haven't been hit by the risky thing before and therefore you'll never be hit by the risky thing. So yeah, survivor bias and overconfidence kind of plays into each other there a little bit. And yeah, it's also kind of this notion, even a different way of being like doing something the same so many times and expecting like a different outcome kind of thing because you're just overconfident in your abilities.
Doesn't happen to women as much, I'd say.
Not as much.
I don't know why. We tend to underestimate abilities,
Yeah. And I definitely
go ahead.
No, go on. I was going to say, yeah, I think that's definitely, I would say stereotypically, we'll qualify and say stereotypically, not as common in women. Imposter syndrome is obviously a lot more common in women. I think that really comes down to like the nature nurture question. Women are nurtured to be less confident in our abilities and we are consistently underestimated, by and large in the workforce. So we kind of factor that in when we're doing stuff. So we are used to having to have more of our ducks in a row and to be a lot more sure and backed up by data in the stuff that we will present and suggest because we get a lot more questions and criticism for those things. So we have to be more prepared. Again, stereotypically, not all the time. And so we don't really have the privilege of overconfidence bias.
Because
we've never really been able to have it up to that point.
That level of equality yet.
But that's not to say it doesn't happen. Like it absolutely does.
Of course, I know a few people who have overconfidence problems.
Yeah, and again, I mean, we're all humans, so like women are just as susceptible to this. So like, if women have been successful repeatedly and like, things have just worked out for them, then they will start to be susceptible to overconfidence bias and assume it'll just work out again. Yeah.
Is it I might be wrong if this is the same thing, the Dunning-Kruger effect?
Very, yeah. I was going to mention that. I can never remember the exact wording of Dunning-Kruger. As in, because it's very specific and I don't like to and I'm actually just going to look in, you probably hear me typing now and I really do apologize for that, but I'm actually going to look for like the, kind of official definition to say it first.
I have the Wikipedia definition, but I don't know if I want to say that because...
Yeah,
I'll let you do it.
Kind of, yeah. So basically, the Dunning-Kruger effect happens when people start learning about something. And, you go from a knowledge of 0 where you're like, I don't know anything about this. Say, for example, growing plants, right? You're like, imagine an actual knowledge of 0 where you're like, wow, I have no idea. This is magic to me. Like, I actually don't know how this works. And then like you sit down for a few days and people tell you, do you know what happens? Like there's a seed and it gets nutrients from the soil and then it needs water and sunlight. And then over time it'll grow. And you're like, whoa, like this has honestly blown your mind. And now you're like, I know how all of this works because every single plant just needs these things. And I could do this. I can make this happen. I can grow anything I want. Now, obviously, the more then you would learn about growing things, you realize actually it's incredibly complex and so many different things need different environments and seasonality comes into play, and then like insecticides come into play, and then scale comes into play, like, you know, it's huge. I don't, you know, and then you know, to get to that kind of expertise level. And so the Dunning-Kruger effect is that kind of graph where if you imagine you're coming from zero, it shoots up in your confidence level in your knowledge as you learn that kind of beginning of new things. And then the more you learn, your confidence of what you know goes down, because it's this thing of like the more you know you don't know.
You realize the scale of it.
The problem with the Dunning-Kruger effect is that a lot of people stop at the top of the graph and they say, I know everything now, I don't need to learn anything else. And then they present themselves as experts in that field. So you imagine someone who just learned for the first time that, like, you know, growing plants is not magic. It's actually you put something into the ground with good soil and you water it and sun comes and it grows. And they go to like an industrial farmer who has created like specific, you know, breeds of crops and tries to tell them how to grow corn. It's ridiculous, right? Like it's of course it's ridiculous, right? But that's essentially what Dunning-Kruger effect is you have people who think that they are experts, they are overconfident in their abilities. And then they present themselves as experts and cause a lot of problems because people then receive them as experts because they're so confident in their own abilities. And yes, the answer is the Dunning-Kruger effect can come into play a lot here.
You just sound, again, very similar things, you know, just it's kind of related, and it's interesting. So to actually be an expert, I think you need like time versus knowledge, right, or something like that. You know,
you have to basically, you keep learning about the subject matter, and
the more expert you become.
And you can kind of tell this with people, like most people who are, you know, if you ask them questions about the things that they know, you'll kind of notice, even like we do this a lot in this podcast, where, you know, we'll say like, we know a little bit about this, there's so much more to know, we actually only know this thing, and we're always like qualifying it with like, we're not the experts. It's generally those people who have started to really like dig into things. There's probably just as many people out there talking about the exact same stuff we're talking about it. I mean, like presenting it as brand, like the joke we made earlier, presenting it as a brand new idea that they are now experts in. You know, because they've just learned about it for the first time. And that's kind of how you can root the Dunning-Kruger effect out a little bit, is a lot of people who have really read into something will freely admit almost very early on, they'll be like, now I don't really know, like I'm no expert, and or like, actually there's so much more to this than I can, you know, that I know yet, but here's what I know so far. Normally people will qualify it with that. And that's a good way to hear it. But it's
we all know a few people who know everything about something. I probably have done it myself, to be honest.
I'm sure I have.
I'm sure, and I would cringe to think back to what I said. Oh my god.
Anyway. And it's also kind of like where you see sometimes this play out as well. I don't know if it's some of it is design, to be clear, in politics, is the thing is that people receive confidence positively. And so the more confident you can appear in what you're saying, the better people receive it. And that's a real problem. And so like in politics, you'll have people who you know, will try to explain something. And the ones who confidently say something very simple and reductive seem to get, you know, more receptive kind of opinions of it than someone who tries to explain it. So a great example of this recently, and this drives me crazy, by the way, but I don't know if you saw, Mark Carney was asked a very bad faith question by a journalist, I put that in inverted commas, where they were trying to do a gotcha question, right? And they were basically just trying to say, like, are you going to repay the public back for the $500,000 you spent traveling to Europe, right? Now, in case people don't know, he went there to look at expanding trade relations, which is absolutely necessary in the geopolitical climate and economic climate that we find ourselves in today. And most people sensibly understand that. And also, diplomatic things are paid, trips are paid for by the government. Like, that's,
I mean, it's not new. It's not new information.
This isn't brand new information. And so, he asked him this, and then you see this a lot in some kind of like bad faith journalism, where they were like yes or no. And Carney was having none of, he kind of explained, like he went through, look, this is the situation we're in, blah 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 blah, and he like explained it for a while. And the journalist was like, oh, I'll take that as a no then. And Carney went, no, you'll take that as a comprehensive answer to your question.
No
It was
way.
beautiful. First of all, it was beautiful. It was amazing. But this is kind of the example, is that like, that was a great example of someone who said, no, look, this is actually a complex situation. I'm going to try and explain it to you the best that I can, because I can't give you a simple answer to that. And that's what you're seeing there, is someone who is not a victim of the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? They're aware that it's complex. They will try to explain it. There's so much more to it that they know they can't go into. They kind of say that, like, look, there's all this other stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then you have someone like the journalist who might be a victim of the Dunning-Kruger effect, or at the very least pretending to be, who's trying to get just this little like snappy, like one-shot thing, as if they can reduce it down to this very simple thing, when in reality you can't. And
that's great, actually, that you responded like that.
It was so good.
Yeah. That's what you want in your leaders, to be able to deliver a coherent message that makes sense in a confident way, because you don't want a leader that's not confident.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you're
but you want them to be confident. You also want them to be
know their stuff. Yeah. You can, and that's what you can be confident when you know your stuff, because you're able to explain to people in a way that they'll understand. Or in the case of that journalist, he didn't quite understand, but he was going for the shock factor. He did understand, but you know, he was trying to frame it in a way that it was negative.
And so it's just a good example. It's like, watch for the people who will try and explain something with some qualifications of like, it's complex, it's nuanced. Sometimes they can be accused of like, oh, but you're just not answering the question. And it's like, no, you need to listen to them. They are trying to answer your question. It's just the question isn't that simple. They are the people you want to watch out for, in a good way. Like, as in, watch out for the people who are really trying to explain complex situations to you. They have normally are experts in their fields. They normally have deep knowledge in something, and they kind of acknowledge that there's loads of different moving parts and stuff to it. Yeah. When you don't have that, I guess is what I'm saying, the inverse of that is someone who maybe the Dunning-Kruger effect or overconfidence bias is like very present in them, right? But yeah. Also, vote, please, everybody. I can tell you how I'm going to vote. I don't care how you vote. I mean, obviously I do care, but like, not my business. Just vote. Just vote. I would just vote, right? Like, vote how you want to vote, but please actually vote.
It's the message from your local voting station manager.
Yeah, we'll see if we do for the federal one. I did apply again.
Oh, good. So you might as well. I got handed a leaflet by the guy I like outside No Frills.
Ah, great.
He was handing out leaflets for his representative or whatever, the NDP guy, and I was like, oh, I voted for you. He's like, oh, what's your name? I'm your biggest fan. But I didn't realize it was him until like I went out the door, and I was like, oh. So I was starstruck. But yeah, I will be voting whenever that happens. What date is it? Do you know?
I don't know the official day, but it looks like it's going to be the 28th of April.
Okay. I will note that down to look it up later.
In about a month.
Okay.
Because they just asked us out of Parliament there on Sunday and to do it, and so that's where we're at. Yes. So I mean, this isn't what our podcast is about. But serious times, high risk. Get out and vote. That would be great.
Yeah. If you're not going to do it for yourself, do it for Jen.
Do it for your country. Do it for Canada. Oh yeah. Also, if anybody's listening to us, we're talking about the Canadian federal election.
Yes. There's no election in Ireland right now.
Counter to our accents, we are talking about the Canadian federal election, where
honestly,
we both currently live.
Sometimes we forget.
We do forget. Go, vote. Do it for your country. There you go.
Okay. Anyway, any red flags of the week?
Any red flags for the week? Yes. Red flags for the week are disorganized communication.
Yeah, that's a problem.
I don't know. Was this my red flag last week? Where for either like a client, right, that you're trying to land, or company you're trying to partner with, or somebody that you're interviewing with, if they seem to be a little bit all over the place in their communication with you beforehand, it's likely an indication of how they operate internally.
Yeah.
Not always. Obviously, things happen, miscommunications happen, but if you see like a consistent pattern, then I would believe that to be a red flag. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to do anything. It's just something to be conscious of, like especially if there's a client that you're trying to land and there's a lot of disorganized communication. you might, of course, still want to land that client, but it's something to be aware of when you then continue to communicate with them going forward, right? Like you have to be maybe more specific, more frequent, making sure you've got the right people copied in on the communication. That's like maybe having to like double and triple communicate stuff sometimes to make sure it really lands where it's meant to land. So it's a red flag for potentially having to like alter future behavior communication patterns, and an indication of potentially how organized a company is internally. And now that I say that, I feel like I might have said that one before, but that one has been top of mind this week.
Yeah, I don't think you have. I mean, it's not a good sign if things are disorganized before you even sign the contract or anything like that, right? This is in the honeymoon phase or the wooing phase or whatever you want to call it, and things should be done like really well. So that is, concerning, that there would be issues like that. So something to think about.
That's mine. What about yours?
I was trying to think of one, but I have one that's not work related.
Oh yeah.
It's commuting related.
Oh, go on.
It's people who don't wait for other people to get off the subway before they try to board.
Yes.
Multiple times today it happened where the etiquette is you kind of stand to the side of the door. Of course, there's a way to do it. Yep. People were coming out, and this kid was just barreling through them all. And I've seen professional people do it too, but today it was just like, I think a college student or whatever. But I was like, where did you learn your manners from? Like, it's just so...
Who raised you?
Yeah, Jesus. I mean, I should have said something in a minute, but then, it's Toronto. You don't really want to say anything because you never know what can happen.
See, if I'm getting off, because you stand to get off, and if someone is standing right in front of me when the door is open, I literally just like give them like absolute hard eye contact, and I just wait for them to move. I literally stare them down until they move. But I'm not even joking.
Withering stare,
because it's just like I just stand at them and I'm like, I need to get off.
This is common decency, and it is. And surely, when somebody is coming off something, your natural instinct would be to like step aside before. Like, honestly, I don't know what people think.
I think it's even more than common decency, because if you get onto the up, right, and a lot of the stations in the up, especially at Pearson, the arrows are on the floor. They literally tell you where to stand. They have arrows pointing on where it's off to the side, and the arrows coming off. Like it's more than common decency. It's actually expected behavior. It's encouraged behavior by the TDC specifically, where we are.
Giving you the information you need.
Yeah, and it makes everything feel like you literally get on quicker if you let people off first, because you're not like trying to fight through people, and everything moves quicker. The whole system moves quicker if you do it.
There's no positives to it.
No, there isn't.
Maybe they think that they got on first and they get a better seat, and that's a small win for them. But
but if they let everybody off, they're more likely to get a better seat. Because like this is the thing, is like actually even in that scenario,
so
you let everybody off, there's more availability inside.
So there is no positive to it whatsoever.
No. I think extreme individualism.
Like people who think they can skip queues and stuff like that. Don't get me started. Don't get me started. Anyway, that is something that I am very
with you on that one.
Yeah,
with you on that one. I think this will turn into red flags and pet peeves.
Actually, because we're going to have to, because I'm running out of red flags.
Which is good.
Yeah, it is good. I actually thought I would have an unlimited supply of them, but I'm just going to have to take more time to think about them.
If we had enough of an audience, we could ask people to send us in your red flags.
We did. We asked on Instagram, and we got somebody, and it was office politics that we talked about.
Oh.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll do that again. Other people's
pet peeves as well, just general pet peeves.
Yeah.
And things commuting wise as well, because now that I'm a commuter again, I see a lot of annoying things, and it's an unhinged environment. There's no rules. There are rules, but there's not. So every day is a different experience. Anyway.
Yeah, we never talked about how to counter overconfidence bias. I know we're at the end there, but
I think we'd said there's actually not really any way to counter it unless you are aware that you're doing it.
No,
or somebody tells you to cop on.
Yeah, I think it's like if it's in yourself, you have a word with yourself.
Not a problem for us.
And some self-awareness. If you're trying to counter it in other people, it's kind of very similar to the other stuff, which is basically go back to the data all the time, go back to the data. But it's kind of trickier here because you're kind of looking at the data of like an individual. So you're like, well, how often are their predictions actually true? Right. Or, how could this fail? So what things would have to happen for this to fail if they're like proposing an idea or a strategy or something. So it's kind of like similar to groupthink where you're challenging, like a devil's advocate kind of challenge, except it's about an individual as opposed to the group, which makes it harder again. And so it becomes, again, with power imbalance, becomes more difficult to deal with. So the more kind of power a person holds within a company, the more difficult you get to be able to challenge that. So
you definitely don't see it in like really, really lower level jobs. Or well, you do, but like not as much as you would in a position of power.
Exactly. Yeah. I think, and actually maybe I'll reframe that. It's harder to deal with position of power, yes, but I think one of the reasons it's harder to deal with is because it has such a wider effect. So you do see it in junior level ones. It'll generally be easier to kind of stamp out because it's more of a collective environment the more junior you are. But then also because individually at a junior level, you don't have a lot of accountability and you don't have as big of an impact or potential impact that your actions, can have. And so it's maybe less noticeable, or it's less of a problem, it's less of a risk, it's less of something you need to watch out for. But the more impact you have, the more accountability you have, the more impact your decisions have, more power you have, the more it's like a much bigger risk, and also harder to deal with now because that person is in a much higher position. So so maybe like what we might do next time, either via this or maybe via an article, I'm not sure, is group them according to the solution. So we might talk about best practices for countering, various kind of biases and fallacies, and have it as the actual practice, and then the biases or fallacies that kind of helps to counter. But fundamentally, it comes down to knowledge is power. So knowing about them, being aware of them, having to look out for them, in most cases, actually does half of the work for you.
Yeah. Don't assume you know everything.
Or anything.
Or anything at all. Yeah. So, okay. Well, that was great. We'll be back.
It was a great time. We had a great time.
Great time was had by all. And it's time to have dinner now. So we'll be back next time with more interesting topics.
On A Word with Yourself.
You got it right this time.
Thank you. I am proud.
Go and have a word with yourself, will you? Jesus. Anyway.
I will.